With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yoma, Daf, Yud, Aleph. We will learn an entire Daf today about mezuzah. Now, we already began yesterday, and let's reiterate a very important principle, that although the obligation of a mezuzah applies only to a place of residence, as we'll define better today, nevertheless, courtyards, even cities, require mezuzah by their gates, because in these general larger locales we have over there houses. That's a very important yesod to remember. Now, we're going to have, during the big time of today's daf, a big part of today's daf, we'll be recording a machlokes between Rav Kahana and Rav Yehuda. But listen to this is a little bit complex. They are having a machlokes whether there is a machlokes tanoim, whether a storehouse requires a mezuzah or not. Now, this is a very practical topic. Many people today, they have a shed, they have a storehouse on their property. We're speaking about a storehouse, not that they barely ever go to. That might be different. But a storehouse. It's not a place of residence, whether there is a requirement for it to have a mezuzah or not. So there is a machlokes amoyroyim, whether it is a machlokes tanoim. Just in the introduction, just to make it from the outset, to know that we paskin that it requires a mezuzah. But that will be a big part of today's topic. We're going to be learning the din of sha'ar hamadi, a median gate. A median gate is a curved archway. Here in Los Angeles, we call this a Spanish-style home. It's very common here that an archway is curved. And I know that we repeated the machlokes between Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim, whether we say choykikin, mitanun, lahashlim or not. We'll explain this when we learn it. But the nekudah will be like this, that in order for a doorway to have an obligation to have a mezuzah, it has to have minimum dimensions, which are the width of 4 tfachim or more, the height 10 tfachim or more, and it has to have a lintel, and according to some, 2 side posts, and according to others, only the right side post. If it doesn't have these requirements, then there will not be an obligation to have a mezuzah. It's really not that great. We should appreciate how low really is 10 tfachim. It's really not that high. But nachbal, it has to have 4 tfachim width, 10 tfachim height, and the issue regarding an arched gateway or an arched doorway is not like here in LA where there are arches, but the arches begin, the curved part begins way above the 10 tfachim. There's no issue over there. We will see there's a machlokes tanoim. What happens if the arch begins within the 10 tfachim? It cannot begin if it's even lower. Now, what happens when there is an arch, the higher up you go in the arch, the less width there is in. And like we mentioned, if it's an arch, but it's such a huge arch that there's always going to be 4 tfachim, then who cares if it's arched? Just to make that clear, an arched doorway means that since it begins to curve, since it begins to arch, so now you no longer have the minimum 4 tfachim. So we'll clarify when does it begin to arch, and we'll clarify further the machlokes when a maid will hold your chayiv b'mezuzah, when you won't be chayiv b'mezuzah. And since we are going to be learning so much about the classification of a house, b'negei to dinei mezuzah, we will make a corollary b'negei the din of tzaras. That all of the laws and parshas in the parsha of tzaras habayis are very much related to the dinim of whatever is defined as a bias b'negei mezuzah. That is a bias that if it has those signs of discoloration or of mold or the green and the red, that will then have the status of a bias that's afflicted with tzaras. But if it's not classified as a bias, even if all of the simanim of tzaras appear, then there won't be any of the dinim of tzaras habayis and much more. And Chavra, let us start. We left off 6 lines from the top of the Amid, in middle of the line, Tanach Rabbanan. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech ha'olam she'ar kol yimei dvarim. Okay, Tanach Rabbanan, we learned in a Brais that when the Torah says the words, as we repeat at least twice a day when we say the Shema, Uchsaftom al mezuzos beisecha, the word is uvisha arecha, on your gates. So says the Gemara, says the Braisa, Echad she'arei batim, avada, this refers to the gates of your houses. The Echad she'arei chatzeiros, don't forget gates are in plural, whether it's gates of your courtyards, whether it is even sha'arei medinos, that means if you have a very large province, you have a very large region, and there are many times that it's built either in between mountains, or you have from most sides certain natural barriers, which forces people who enter and exit that region through a gateway. So, now again, we already spoke in the introduction. If the gateway needs to have either two mezuzahs, according to some, at least one from the right, it has to have a lintel, that's not what we're focusing on. We're focusing on whether that's an area that's mechayev, the gateway, the mezuzahs and the mashkoif, and mezuzah. So yes, says the Braisa, if there's a city that you enter to it by going through a gateway or a gate. So says the Braisa, all of the above, yesh behen choivas mitzvah, there is the obligation of the mitzvah. We're speaking about the mitzvah of mezuzah, to whom? Lamakim, for God. It's good to say that sometimes, because even though emes, that mezuzah has in it the power of shemirah, but we're putting up the mezuzah because God wants us to put up a mezuzah for shemirah, the way that Rebbe words it. It's by the shemirah, by the mezuzah, is not called shaloi l'shma, but we can never take the oibishter out of it. So it's lamakim, shenemar. Because since it says the uvisha orecha is in the plural, so it includes all types of gates. Okay, and as we spoke out, now what I'm saying now will be challenged on Amud Beis. This is a big topic amongst the Rishonim, but the wording will be that like we mentioned yesterday about the Shad Niknar, that why is Shad Niknar Chayv Mezuzah? Because since inside the courtyard of the Beis Hamikdash, you had the Lishkas Parhedrin, which was a place where people lived. The Kohen Gadol lived 1 week a year. So it's all about ultimately a residence, but even a larger area that has within it a residence is going to be chayiv in mezuzah. Okay, Amalei Abaya Leraf Safra Oy Bazoi Havakasha Hani Abulei the Mechayza, the gates through which you go when you enter the Yiddish town of Mechayza. Now make no mistake, many goyim lived in Mechayza, but the Roiv residents in that city or in that town or in that village were Yidden, and that is very important. When you have a location, as we say over here, it goes after the Roiv. So he says, listen, I know that the gate doesn't go into a house, but now that you quoted the Braisa, it doesn't have to go directly into a house. There should have been a mezuzah there. So answers the Gemara, says Rab Safra to Abaye, Amalei, Hanu chizuk la'akra de kubei huda avide. You have to see a picture of it. When you enter many cities or many towns, there was a gateway, but the gateway wasn't only to service, an entranceway that you can maybe close, but on top of the gateway was arched, and on top of it there was a tower. And he says, Oy Bazoi, when you have a tower built on a gateway, so when you look at the gateway, why did they make the gateway? Was it for people to enter and to exit, or was it as a fortified foundation to a tower? And as we all know, that when you have an arch, then building on top of an arch, that is like a very good foundation for that which comes on top of it. Let's say if Kevin found a picture. No. That's the Amud Beis. We're now far away. We have an hour to get there. Bottom line is, he says, since the primary purpose of that gateway, let's take this picture down, is in order to support the tower, and it's not l'shei mitzvah's gateway, that's why it's exempt. So Amar Le Abaye was not happy with that, because he told him that in the tower itself, you're right, Moida, if it's primarily to be as a support for the tower, so fine, but the tower itself had in it a residence. Who would live in the tower of these cities? Amalei va'akra de kubei. He says that the tower, right, the kubei tower, gufa itself needs to have a mezuzah. The structure there also served the ha'isba dira l'shomer beisu asurim. The what's it called? The person in charge of the prison. The guy that was in charge of the prison, that is where he lived. So therefore, forget about the fact that it goes into a city where people live. No. That gateway also allowed you to go up the stairs and in there someone lived. So Vaited, it should have had a mezuzah. And as we learned, that Beis HaKnesses, and this is another topic that we'll learn about today, I think we mentioned this yesterday, that one of the diyukim that we have from Sinai, Benegei mezuzah, that it has to be a Beis Choil, that a location that's completely dedicated, La Kodesh, is exempt from mezuzah. Now nowadays, what we would call a Beis HaKnesses is a place that even if people are allowed just to eat and drink in, as we are allowed to, because lechatchila we were never magdish it with the highest level of Kedusha's Beis HaKnesses, then you have to have a mezuzah. The Beis HaKnesses that the Braisa is referring to is a location that is designated exclusively for davening. Such a place is exempt from mezuzah if the only thing you have in the building is the Beis HaKnesses. But if you have an entry to a Beis HaKnesses, that in a side room, sheyesh ba beis dira, which was the common thing that in one of the side rooms in the structure of the house designated for prayer, beis dira l'chazan HaKnesses. Chazan in the Tanoim doesn't mean what we would call a cantor. A chazan would mean the shamish, the person that took care of the shul. So it says the Braisa, Yechayv mezuzah. That's a very important point. Again, like we began today in the Yisoid, that if you have a sha'ar that goes into an open area, if somewhere into a city, since in the city there are residences, you're chayiv mezuzah even in the sha'ar of the ir. So even though the Beis HaKnesses per se is not machayev a mezuzah, but since in order for you to get to the chazan's residence, you have to walk through the structure of the shul. There's another detail that's not negeya here. You're not allowed to make the shul into a passway. So it's time to know if the only way to get to the base hachazan is walking through the shul. You know the dinim. You have to walk in there. You have to sit down. You have to say a few psukim. That's not the point here. The point is that if since the tower that they had over there had in it a residence, even though the gateway didn't go directly into his residence, but the way to get there is to go in through the gateway of this tower. So weiter, we're back to the kasha. Why did they not put a mezuzah on the gates of the town of Mochais? And that was such a strong kasha that Abaye needed to give a new answer. Amalei Abaye, the answer is mishum sakana. There's a danger. The goyim were suspicious of us practicing witchcraft, and of others also. And some of us got fined money. Some people in those years got burnt at the stake. Who knows what they did? And he says, Pashit, he says there was a sakana that if we're going to put up a mezuzah, there's going to be a reprimand for the Jewish people practicing witchcraft. Now this in itself, Pashit, there's a big daf today, and it's very practical, but this is something that has to be elaborated, which God willing we'll do on another time. There are some times that we say, it's not Yaharik Val Yavar. The concept, I'm doing a mitzvah. But here we see, no, there are times that even if I'm chayiv, if there is a danger involved, I don't have to do it. Maybe it was a danger of life. Maybe it's even only a danger of money, because there's about how much money do you have to spend for a mitzvah saseh. And here it's not direct money, it's about repercussions. But let's speak about the sakana. The Tanya says in a Braisa, mezuzah siyachit. A mezuzah that's in a private property, nivdeke, should be examined pa'am mayim b'shavua. Twice. Shavua doesn't mean a week. Shavua means 7 years. If the mezuzah is in a shel rabim, so then look at the Braisa, twice in 50 years. Voseppas twice in 50 years. Look inside the Rashi, 13 lines from the top of the Amid. Rashi gives a very important yisoid. Kol davar shehu shel rabim. Ein lahatriach olav harbei. Because she'im tatriach yeh kol echad oimer yasu chaveirai. Really, you're chayv to check it twice in 7 years. But since the mezuzah of the city, it won't be clear who's obligated to check it. Everyone can say, okay, it's my friend. So they felt that if you'll have to do it twice in 7 years, that will be a lot. That's a tircha. Twice in 50 years, people are going to do it. The Rabbim Shlomo is saying is not an institution. I agree with you. Well, we'll see in the end of the sugya today. How do you define a shul on top of Yud Beis? I can just say that if the shul is in a big city like in LA, it's considered shul Rabbim, because a shul is a place where every yid has the right to come. If it's in a little village, that's different. Then you're pasha, there are 15 families. It almost becomes like a house of partners. But anyways, I just want to point out that even though this is al pi halacha, and even more, you should know chavra that al pi halacha, many poskim say that other than mezuzahs that people put on their garage in areas that the mezuzah is exposed to the elements, many poskim say that me'ikir adin, you don't have to check the mezuzah, not even twice in 7 years. So just to be aware of that conversation. But nevertheless, regardless of it, we also know that the Rebbe, lifnim mishuras hadin, very much opined that we should check our tefillin and mezuzahs once a year, just to put it out there. But coming back over here. And v'amar Rabbi Yehuda, Maisa be'artabin echad. Now there's a big debate whether artabin is the name of a person or artabin is the name of a profession. You know, like you have a sandler, a story with we'll just say with a artabin. It's now that we established that even in a public location there has to be a mezuzah. So this artabin was checking the mezuzah, and motzoi kazdoir, that's a Roman officer, found him, and he was choshid that this artabin is practicing witchcraft. For that, v'natal mimenu 1,000 zuz. Just pointing out that there were times that we lived amongst people, even if they were in the minority in the city of Mechayzos. It was in Bavel, that there was a sakana that we're going to get fined for putting up a mezuzah, or worse, chash kishuv. And that justifies not putting up a mezuzah. It's very interesting this. One thing is clear, Chavre, the Yidden and Mechayzah put mezuzahs in their homes. What the goyim were not choishes of kishuv. Could be it didn't bother them that much. You want to do kishuv in your own home, zum gesund. But don't put it in the city, or whatever the psychology was, there was some sort of danger. Frag the Gemara of Ha'amar Rabbi Lazar. This we have in Psachim, this we have in Kedushin, this we have in Chulin, that shluchei mitzvah einon nizoikin. If you're not going to be harmed, you're not going to be fined. Why don't we just say shluchei mitzvah? So here's the famous answer. Answers the Gemara, no. Heicha the kaviyah hazeka. Wherever the likelihood of being damaged is something common, then we don't say shluchei mitzvah einon nizokim. Shani, that's different. And where do we know that from? That's the pasuk, the chsiv, that when Shmuel was told to anoint David HaMelech, Shmuel tells Hashem that I'm afraid of Shaul HaMelech. It's a very interesting conversation. Now, of course, Hashem can tell, the Eibishter is the Eibishter. Don't worry. But he told him, no, do something that Al Piderech HaTeva, Shaul won't even know. Hashem is teaching Shmuel, don't rely on me in this case. Because you're doing something that's taka dangerous. You're doing something that's in defiance of the current king, Shaul. So Vayemer Shmuel, this is to Hashem, Eich Elech. How can I go to anoint David when Vishama Shaul is going to hear about that I went there, and Vaharagani, he's going to push and kill me. Imagine. I'm smiling because Hashem says do something, rely on the Eibishter. We are told B'tachin. But that's the whole point of the story, that we have to try to do everything b'derech hateva. So Hashem, okay, you're right. So what you do is you trick Shaul that eglas bakar tikach biyodeka. Take a eglas bakar means a young calf, and ve'amarta, and let people know that lizboyach lashem basa. And by the way, that was probably true. Part of the trip was to bring a carbon, and then people are not going to look into what else you did over there. Okay. Says the Gemara Tani, Rav Kahana, here we start. This is, guys, from now, that's the bulk. Rav Kahana, Rav Yehuda. Tu Amayroim. They're quoting Braises. And again, the whole thing will be whether there is even a machloikes Tanoim, whether a beis ha'oitzer, which is something that we have, many people have a storage house, a shed, whether a beis ha'oitzer is chayiv and mezuzah or not. Tani Rav Kahana Kamed Rav Yehuda. Rav Kahana taught the following Braisa. Says in the Braisa, beis hateven, a storage house, this is specific for straw. A straw storehouse. Beis habakar, a barn. Beis ha'etzim, a woodshed. And then b'chlal, ubeis ha'oitzrois. Now why does the Tana have to specify? I don't know. It's storage houses. Says the Tana, p'turim and amazuz. And why? This is going to be fun. Mipnei sha'anoshim ne'oisois bahen. Now the word ne'oisois means beautify, but let's go. The women make use of it somehow. That's why it's exempt. So the Gemara interrupts. What does it mean? My neyoisos. It means roi chatzois. Upa. That's very significant. Why is it exempt from a mezuzah? Because since women bathe there, since that environment is used by people that are undressed, either it's because it's undressed or it's because it's undignified. That's why it's exempt. If this is the pshat, that's a very big statement. That really means that a beis ha'oitzer, in principle, is chayiv. But since that's the locations where women would bathe, that's why it's pater. That's the way Rav Kahana learned pshat. Oh, so that's a source that a beis ha'oitzer is chayv mezuzah. So Amalei Rav Yehuda, hold on. You're telling me that no, if nei oisos means that they bathe, means that taima deroi chatzois, which implies hastama stam, then they're chayiv, because you're telling me that this braisa will understand that a storage house is enough residence. The word is it has to be a residence, but that's called a residence. A residence has to be where you have a bed to sleep. A residence has to be where you have a table to eat. Lav dafka, you're storing. But the problem is, and it's for sure, even according to Rav Kahana, it's a machlokes tanoim. But v'hatanya, he's quoting another braisa. Refes bakar, a stable. Now, a stable, the premise which won't be challenged, that a stable for animals is like a storage house. Let's accept that premise. And it says clearly, P'turim en HaMezuzah. And Rav Yehuda doesn't want for there to be a machlokes tanoim, which will be Rav Kahana's solution. Say that. So therefore, Rav Yehuda says there isn't even a machlokes tanoim. No Tana holds that a beis ha'oiser is chayv and mezuzah. What's the pshat in the first braisa that we just learned? My nei oisois, punkt fakert. That women are miskashtois. Women would use it as a location for them to adorn themselves, to put on makeup, to put on perfume. It's mamish the opposite meaning of Rav Kahana. Rav Yehuda is saying that the Tana is saying that a storage house is so far from a mezuzah, it's potted from a mezuzah because it's made for storage. Even though women sometimes use it for adorning themselves. So you would think, oh, bazoi, epis, people use it. No, it's a storage house. Guys, you got it? So here we have clearly, Rav Yehuda holds that not one Tana holds that a beis ha'oiser is chayv. And Rav Kahana clearly holds otherwise. Amalei Rav Kahana, what are you telling me? How can you tell me that a place that is also used by women to adorn themselves remains exempt, the first medium-sized line, and this is a different braisa? I know it begins like the one above. Nacha braisa, everyone had a Masorah from their Rebbes, from different braisas. Vatanya, Refes Bakar, a stable, that we said already, a stable is like a storage house. And clearly, Rav Kahana is going to be moided that it's a machlokes tanoim. Here, p'turim en hamezuzah, but if v'shahanoshim iskashtois bohem, then yes, chayeves b'mezuzah. Elo ma yislach l'meimor. It must be that this is what Rav Kahana is telling Rav Yehuda, that miskashtois, whether an area that's also used by women to adorn themselves is a machlokes tanoim. So, okay, so l'didinami stama, whether a storage house that's not that women use it for their adornment, but stama, whether an ordinary storage house is chayv mezuzah or not, is also a machlokes tanoim. And here we're learning yet another braisa. And this braisa will have to be interpreted Rav Kahana l'shitosoi and Rav Yehuda l'shitosoi. Simple. The Tanya, third medium line, it says beisecha, what's maybe your house, says the braisa beisecha hamiyuchad l'cha. It has to be specifically yours. What does it mean, yours? What is the braisa excluding? The braisa writes, Prat lebeis hateven, a house to store straw, lebeis habakar, a barn, lebeis ha'etzim, a woodshed, lebeis ha'oitzreitz, general storage houses, they are not yours. Yours meaning yours to live. That's pshat. Shepturim en hamezuz. But, look at the words of the braisa is mamish, like it's mashma like Rav Kahana. But v'yesh mechayavin. All of this is Rav Kahana. You see, it's a machlokes tanoim. And furthermore, says the Braisa, be'emes amru, whether be'emes means halacha l'moshe misinai, be'emes, so everyone agrees that what? That beis hakisei, a latrine, ubeis habursikei, a tannery, ubeis hamerchatz, a bathhouse, ubeis hatfila, a mikvah, and v'shahanoshim ne'oisois bohem. We'll see soon what this word means. So then everyone agrees that it's potem and hamezuzah. Now, obviously, Rav Kahana sees that this is a machlokes tanoim, whether a beis ha'oiser stam is chayv or not. So the Gemara says, instead of saying kasha Rav Yehuda, the Gemara says Rav Kahana mataretz l'tamei, and Rav Yehuda mataretz l'tamei. Guys, don't forget that even Rav Yehuda is moida that there is a machlokes tanoim, whether a place where women adorn themselves, whether that's chayv and mezuzah. But according to Rav Yehuda, no one says that stama beis ha'oiser needs mezuzah, and everyone will learn the pshat in the Braisa. And the Gemara explains. Rav Kahana mataretz l'tamei. The Braisa begins saying beisecha. Beisecha means beisecha meyuchad loch. Designated for you. What does it mean, designated for you? What is the Braisa trying to say? Prat lebeis hateven, lebeis habakar, lebeis ha'etzim, lebeis ha'oitzroitz, shepturim en hamezuzah bistam. This is Rav Kahana. And then the Baraisa says Taka v'yeshem achayven b'stam. Clearly, in other words, machloikis tanoim, whether a storage house is chayv mezuzah or not. And then the Baraisa continues be'emes amru. Beis akisei, beis abursikei, beis amerchatz, beis atfila, vish anoshim le'oisus b'hem. And now, what does that mean? Here is the key: that the ma'inu oisam roichatzin. No, it's even though the Braisa quotes some who hold that a storage house is chayv mezuzah, now says the Braisa, but if women bathe there, bathing is a reason why it should be exempt, then everyone agrees that it's going to be exempt. But the only problem is that the Braisa already wrote that a beis hamerchatz is exempt. So if the meaning, if women bathe, it's exempt, if it's used for bathing, then you are exempt. So eihachi hainu merchatz. Rav Kahana says that's not a problem because Ashmi'in and Merchatz derabim, that's the first line in the Braisa, Beis HaKisei, Beis HaKur, Beis HaMerchatz, and then the Braisa, the last statement was V'sheh HaNoshim Neyoisois, Ashmi'in and Merchatz de Yochid. Why do you have to specify that? Because the Salkatay Techamino, Merchatz derabim, everyone uses a location, the Nafish Zuhame. Zuhame doesn't mean a schwitzbad. Zuhame means it smells bad. Many people use it. There's a very bad odor. In a private bathhouse, like in today, doesn't smell bad. That's why he said, is it about that people are undressed? Or is it about that it's not dignified? Or there's some negativity there? So you might have thought only because of a very bad smell. One might have thought that a merchatz de yachid that doesn't have a bad smell or it's not a lot. So then the loyd after zume, the emel chayv mezuzah, Komash Malon, that even that is Pater Mimazuz. Just to know, just to speak out, I know this is a big debate. There are many who were of the opinion that once plumbing was introduced to our homes, and now today in the bathroom itself, in the room where a person relieves themselves, it's very clean and there isn't a bad odor. There are some people that question mark whether it's exempt from a mezuzah. No one puts up a mezuzah. But because of that debate, it's very common, I have this in my house, that before you go into a bathroom, there's like a pre-bathroom room. There's a pre-toilet room. You have a sink. Everyone says you got to put up a mezuzah there. Because since today, the toilet room itself, there's no zuhama. If the issue is zuhama, there's no zuhama. Interesting, all of this is rooted over here. Let's go weiter. Now, the key of Rabbi Yehuda is there isn't even one Tana that says that a storage house needs to have a mezuzah. So how does he learn pshat in the Braisa? Hachiktani. Specifically yours. What does that mean? And it excludes the Beis HaBakar, a barn. It excludes a woodshed. It excludes generally storehouses that are p'turim and mezuzah. Stam. And afilu miskashtois. And even if women don't only use, it's not just a storage room, they do something there, still pater. But on that last detail only, the Yesh say that if women use that environment for them to put up their makeup, for them to adorn themselves, then they're going to be chayiv. Which means even this Tana that's machmir will be moed that there has to be a reason to be machayiv a storage house. Women also have to use it for their adornment. Avol stam divrei hakol pater. Clear. Also, let Rav Yehuda. And then invited in the Braisa be'emes amru beis hakisei beis habursikei beis hamerchatz beis hatfila afal pi sha'anoshim miskashtois bohen. All of them are p'turim and amezuzah. Why? Mishum de nafish zuhamei. Because you don't have to give a reason why a beis ha'oitzer that's also used for a woman to bathe. It's not because she bathes. That's because it's a storage house. The problem with the beis hamerchatz is because the nafresh zuhamei. That's what we just spoke about before. In other words, according to Rav Yehuda, if there is an area where there isn't nafresh zuhamei, maybe it's taka chayv mezuzah. Okay, right. Now says the Gemara, Ul Rav Yehuda, you're telling me that's the whole key of Rav Yehuda against Rav Kahana, that when you have stam, an ordinary storage house, no Tana says you're chayiv. How will you explain, second to last line, the following Braisa? Right, the gates to homes. That's what we started out today. Gates to courtyards. Gates to entire provinces. Gates to cities. And let's go weiter in this Braisa, v'refes and stables, v'lulin and chicken coops, u'matbein straw sheds, v'oitzrois yayin storage houses for wine, v'oitzrois shemen storage houses for oil. Says the Braisa, all of them are chayavin b'mezuzah. My friends, I know the Braisa mentioned over here storage houses. Oitzrois. Okay, so Shlomo is saying, that's what I mentioned before, that it's we have to understand why doesn't the Braisa just say oitzres tam? It specifies, but that will be the base of the kasha over here. But we do mention certain types of storage rooms. Weiter. Yochel sha'ani marba af zog daf yudalaf amid base. Af base shar achsadron. That you had these porticos that extended the house outside, maybe the gate leading you into the achsadra should need. You might think that a gate leading you into a mirpeses. Now I know that today maybe in modern Hebrew mirpeses means a porch. It's that on second stories, you know, these cheap hotels, motels, you have like a second story and you have like this porch on the second floor through which you enter all the different rooms. That's the mirpeses. So the gate going into the mirpeses, which leads you into rooms, you would think it's chayv mezuzah. So Talmud loimer bayis. What's the point of bayis? Ma bayis miyuchad ladira. It has to be specifically for a residence. Yatsu elu, which is the achsadra, which is the mirpeses. She'ein miyuchadim ladira. Now, guys, I want you to know that the big challenge that everyone has over here is that we began today's shiur repeating what the Rishonim say. Going back to what we learned yesterday, that Shad Nikner needs a mezuzah, even though no one lives in the Azara. But since in that area through which you go through the Shad Nikner, there is the Lishkas Parhedrin, that's Machayvin in a mezuzah. The problem is from this Braisa. This Braisa is saying that if you're not going into a base dira, because the mirpeses, I get the achsadra, the kashas from the mirpeses, because when you go into the mirpeses isn't only l'shem a nice porch for you to see the view. The mirpeses is the only way the people live on the second story get into the rooms. This is a big question, but let's put that on the side. Now, the point of this Braisa is just to show that there is a Tana that holds that a beis ha'oitzer is chayvin mezuzah. Adrabah, this Braisa can be also a limiting mezuzah in another area. This Braisa is limiting mezuzah in another area. So here says the Braisa, Talmud loimer bayis, another diuk from bayis, ma bayis also l'kavoid. These are the words. There has to be a dignified function. Afkoil also l'kavoid. Now a beis hakisei, it's both a foul odor, and people are not dressed there properly. A tannery is only about a foul odor, so it's not dignified. Yatsu elu she'ein asuim l'kavoid, that they are exempt. Furthermore, says the Braisa, Yochol sha'animar ba'af harabayis. That means that there were gateways. Again, just to repeat, just because it's a gateway to a location that's chayv mezuzah, if the gateway doesn't have the minimum requirements of 2 mezuzahs, or at least a right side mezuzah and a mashkoif, that's something else. You're not going to be chayv. But there were such gateways. So you would think that a gateway going into Harabayis, or all of the temple chambers, or the azaros, you would think that they were chayiv. That's like what we learned yesterday at the end of the shiur. That aside of Shad Nikner, no, there weren't any mezuzahs. Talmud loimer bayis, ma bayis shuhu choil. This is not even about a dira, not about the topic of the Beis HaKnesses with a little room for the chazan. No, this is that if only choil, af choil, shuhu choil. Yatsu elu, shehein kodesh nekuda. Now, we learned many nuances in this Braisa, but this is brought here only to focus back on the machlekes Rav Yehuda, Rav Kahana, whether there is a machlekes Tanoim, that is there at least one Tana that says that a beis ha'oitzer is chayiv. Rav Yehuda said no. This Braisa says yeah. And the Gemara doesn't answer what Shlomo said. Well, this is only certain type of oitzers. The Gemara says takati yufta, and this goes all the way into halacha l'maisa, which means that we are accepting Shitas Rav Kahana that there is a machloikas tanoim whether a beis ha'oitzer is chayiv or not, and there's a machloikas between the big poskim. But if I'm not mistaken, the Rif and others, I forgot which ones paskin which way, that the shita that a beis ha'oitzer is chayiv and mezuzah is all the way in Shulchan Aruch. And I do remember that there are nafkaminas between a location that's barely used If you remember Masechta Shabbos, we called that a muktzah. Muktzah means an eruvin, an area like a back lot that didn't even have doors going in there. So simple. That's less chayiv mezuzah. But a normal storage shed that everyone has in London, we went to yeshiva, a shed, or people today use their garage as a storage. That is chayiv. We put up a mezuzah. Okay. Next topic. Says the Gemara, Tani Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda Kamei Rav. This Amoira quoted the following Tana, quoted the Brais, and the Brais gives a number, like we had in the beginning of the Perek Shivas Yomim, right? The Soifrim that we learned about on Shkolim, the Tanoim did that to make it easier for us to remember Dinim. There are 6 types of gates that are exempt from mezuzah. The beauty of this Tana, they do it on purpose. They don't count 6, they count 7. They want to keep you awake. Zainish Fashlafen. Number 1, Beis HaTeven, a Beis HaTeven. Number 2, Beis HaBakar. Number 3, Beis HaEitzim. Number 4, Beis HaOitzrois. Again, a general storage house. Number 5, Usha'ar Hamadi. What we would call in Los Angeles a Spanish-style gateway. That means it's a curved archway. That's all it is. Who did it bisman of the Tanoim, the medians? That was the way that they built entranceways. Number 6, Usha'ar she'eino makoida. It's a roofless gate. Even if there are 2 mezuzahs, my friends. But there is no mashkoif, there's no lintel. And number 7, you can count again. It's not 6, it's 7. Ushar she'eino gavoy yod. Any gateway that doesn't even have the height of 10 tvachim. You imagine? He's going through it. There's a lintel. You mamish 35 inches, 39 inches. I'm talking about the minimum of the minimum. That's really not that high. 10 tvachim. It's gavaldi that if it doesn't have 10, then it's potter. So, what are you telling me? Amarlei that the pesachta b'shisha, the baraisa opened up, and you're making it easy for us. It's 6 sha'arim are p'turim mezuzah, and then v'solakt b'shiva, and you conclude gabako count over. You'll see there's 7. Yeah. Good. So what did the Tana wanted us to chap? He wanted us like a puzzle. One of these 7 is not l'kula alma. You know, it's shisha. Everyone agrees it's pater mimim zuzah. One of them, some people say yes, some people say not. So how is he meramas that there's a machlokes tanoim by saying there's 6 are exempt, and then he says 7 are exempt? Because one Tana will hold that from the ones that you mentioned, one is out, one is chayiv. So therefore, there's only 6 that are exempt. And which one is that? Not the last one, but Usha'ar Hamadi, a curved archway. And this indeed is a machlokes tanoim. I want you to know that we had this, not only he says here in the side on Eruvin, I remember this being quoted many times. This machlokes of Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim, whether choyki kin lahashlim. And that's Kevin can put it back up the pictures. So the Tanya, kippah. Kippah is another word that this Tana uses to speak about a curved archway. Kippah and Shar Hamadi is the same thing. That Meir, I think the picture might make it even more confusing, but it looks like a rocket ship over here. So Rav Meir is Machayv Mezuzah. And the Chachamim are Poitrim. Okay. Now, says the Tana, says the Braisa, we mamish have to limit the place where they argue. It's not that the Chachamim are saying any curved archway is spotted. No, they don't mean that at all. So let's begin. So they both agree, she'im yesh beragla asara. Ragla doesn't mean one leg. Means both sides, the mezuzah of the right and mezuzah of the left. I like the picture that's up right now. The ragla means that if both sides of the curved archway, if you begin to measure it from the ground up, and like we mentioned, that it needs to have the minimum of 4 tfachim width. If it begins to curve, and because it curves at a certain point in the height, there isn't any more 4. But within the 10 tfachim to the ground, it didn't even begin to curve yet. It only begins to curve higher. So you have 10 tfachim off the ground on ragla, means on both legs, where you have the minimum width of 4 tfachim. And then let it curve bizin himalarain. What do you care? Everyone is moided that you're chayiv. A further classification, Amar Abai is going more. He's adding the kula alma, that the gavoya yud, but the ein beragla gimel. Gavoya yud, the ein beragla gimel is not the picture that's up in this second, but it means that Mamish on the ground, my friends, there is the width of 4. It begins to curve, but exactly 4. I'm saying exactly 4 because the point is that once it starts to curve, to arch, you don't have the 4 width. If it begins to arch within 3 tfachim of the ground, you don't even have 3 tfachim from the ground. That's the picture right now where there's a width of 4. Then even if no one will say that you're chayiv. Weiter. That's what Abai is adding. The kula alma that even though if you measure the center of the arch, which is the tallest area to the ground, you have the height of 10. But you don't even have the ein beragla gimel. You don't have 3 tfachim that have from the ground 4 tfachim width. Again, v'laf klumhi. V'laf klumhi means no one says you're chayiv. No one says. Another qualification of Abaya. I nama yesh beragla gimel. You do have within the first 3 tfachim to the ground, going melmata lamayla, going up 3 tfachim, you have the width of 4. But you know what? The height of the lintel, even in the center, is under 10 tfachim. Weiter, you're not going to be chayiv. Ve'en gavaya yud, again v'laf klumhi. So now that we said 3 scenarios where they do not argue, so now we can deduce, and the Gemara spells it out to make it easier for us, the area where they do argue. V'lo nechleku ela, the gavaya yud, there is a height of 10 or more. Not only that, v'yesh beragla gimel. Not only that in the first 3 tfachim of the ground, you have a width of 4 tfachim. But here it begins to arch shortly above 3 tfachim above the ground. So as it begins to arch on both sides, it begins to curve from both sides. The right goes into the left goes into the right. So before you hit 10 tfachim, my friends, before you hit 10 tfachim, you no longer have the width of 4. Ve'ein beragla, ve'ein berachava dalid. And here the final classification. I don't see how this picture makes it better, but zolzain v'yesh ba lochoy klashlima, that the thickness of the surrounding walls, the arches in a wall. If there's mamish no wall, if there's just a skinny arch, weiter Rav Meir will not say you're chayiv, because you need to have with up until 10 tfachim, at least theoretically, a width of 4, at least theoretically. Why am I saying theoretically? Because if the wall is thick, which would allow someone who were to want to be choykek, to carve out that wall, and to make the arch into a box. Theoretically. If there's enough wall that you can be choykek, you can carve out the wall, and if you would have carved out the wall, then within the first 10 tfachim, you would have had an opening of 4, even though there isn't. What do you need bepoil? The first 3 tfachim. The first 3 tfachim, you need a width of 4. Why do you need bepoil? That even measuring from the center, 10 tfachim. If you have less than that, is garnished. But if you have those 2 requirements, but between 3 tfachim height and 10 tfachim height, you don't have over there the width of 4, but if you have enough wall to be choykek lahashlam, that is the machlekes. Beautiful. V'yesh ba lachoyk lahashlima l'arba. Here is where Rav Meir holds choykekin lahashlim. V'Rabbanan Savri ein choykekim lahashlim. This machlekes is borrowed and applied in areas that are so externally different. This is a very yesodistic machlekes. Let's go right now. Obviously, guys, I know that we have here what we call Spanish-style homes, but I want you to notice that all of the Spanish-style homes, the arch starts, in most cases here, already above 10 tfachim. And another detail, even if the curved archway begins within the 10 tfachim, but the doorways here are not 4 tfachim wide, you begin much wider. I don't know if it's 8 feet or whatever the standard width is. So the point is, even if it's curving, but measure the width, you'll see that very rare will this become a machlokes Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim, but sometimes it can happen. It's kavalik to know this. Let's go weiter. Tana Rabbanan. Here we have a yeah.
What would be an example of where you could not carve it out of the wall? What is that actually?
I wish there would be a picture. I think that there are some archways that the whole thing is just an archway. It's just a skinny arch of bricks. And people walk through it. It's not like there's a wall, like we have a normal wall and then you made a doorway. It's not a wall, it's an artistic thing. They figure out how to make as an arch, a semicircle stone, beautiful something, or steel or whatever. And
in that case, that would be considered, you can't carve it out, and then
you can break it.
Mayor would agree that it doesn't need
that it will not be chayv mezuzah. Because theoretically you need to have, these are the 10 tefachim tall. At least theoretically in the 10 tefachim tall, the width of 4, you have to have a lintel. The mezuzahs is the big machlokes here in the Shonim. Whether you need to have 2 mezuzahs, or if the one on the right, however you determine, if that has a mezuzah, then you're chayv mezuzah. Just to know that today, but poyal mamish, if there's only one side post, we will put up a mezuzah without making a bracha, because that's the big machlokes, whether it's chayiv only with 2 mezuzahs or 1 mezuzah. Let's go right. Tanach Rabbanan. Beis HaKnesses. There's so many shitos of the Tanoim. We already said today that a Beis HaKnesses is a real Beis HaKnesses, a location that is exclusively used for davening. It's not even allowed to eat or drink there. Certainly not to have any conversations there. It's only God's house. Here, just to know that this Tanach holds, it's still chayiv. This Tanach holds. Ubeis Isha. Now, why would anyone think that a home that belongs to a woman would be exempt? The Gemara is going to say. But it's not exempt. A house that's exclusively owned, or according to many rented, that's another topic. There's so much to talk about. You guys, you should know that there's a whole debate whether, biblically, whether the home is only rented by you, whether you're chayiv or not. We paskin that you're chayiv, make it very clear. However, another detail, that when you live in the Holy Land and you rent a home, you're chayiv miyad. When a person is living outside the Holy Land and they buy, they're chayiv right away to put up a mezuzah. When a person lives outside Eretz Yisrael and they rent, then they are exempt for the first 30 days. And even there, the Rebbe wanted people to put up at least 1 mezuzah right away, even though you're not chayiv to. Let's go weiter. Ubeis HaShutfim, again, there was a psahava bina that if it belongs to partners, it would be exempt. Ubeis HaShutfim says this b'rais achidush, and each one chayiv mezuzah. Now, as we learned above that a Beis HaKnesses, if it doesn't have a Beis Chazan, right, it'll be exempt. So whether this Tana meant only when there's a Beis Chazan or not, the point is, you see that there is a need, it's a chiddush to write that a Beis HaKnesses is chayiv. But why would the Tana have to say that a Beis Isha and a Beis HaShutfim are chayavim? The pshita goes on those 2. Pshita, says the Gemara, it's not a pshita, it's a novelty, because since the Torah says Beisecha, let's speak about masculine and feminine. Beisecha or Beisech. Doesn't say Beisech, it doesn't say it in the feminine, it says in Beloshan Zachar. So you might think V'loi Beisa. Also, it says it in the singular. It says Beisecha. What does it not say? It does not say Botehem. So you would think it's excluding a property that's owned by more than one. So that's the chiddush of the Brais. No, it's a chiddush. Komash malon. Ay ve'ema hachinami. So here says the Gemara. No, since Amarkra, and this is juxtaposed in Parshas Ekev in V'hayim Shemaya. What comes right above it to write which means that the mitzvah of mezuzah also lengthens your life. So Hana boy chai, but only single men need life, but Vahane, but women or shutfim, what they don't need life. No, for sure it includes them. I beisecha lamali. Now really you can answer, we learned a lot today. Beisecha bais hamayuchadlach, excluding an oitzer. But here we have another limud. Beisecha lamali kiderava, which is another practical topic of mezuzah. What side do you put it up? On the right side. Where do we get it from? You know what? From the word beisecha. Not uchsaftam al habayis, but the fact that it says beisecha, we learn right. How? The amarava, this is gavaldik. Now, after you learn it, you say, yeah. So the first white line, derech biyascha, the way you enter. You know, it's beisecha, has a remez, it's like a composite. The way you enter. What's pshat the way you enter? Now guys, this is the way it is, whether it's like this by you or not. When you enter a home, you put the right foot first. When you begin walking, you take the step with the right foot. That since v'chi akar in nishkari, when a person who has his feet rooted on the ground, when you're stationary, when you go into the mode of walking, you're oiker your regel. How does it work? Don't look at your feet, it's irrelevant. Look at what the Torah says. The yamina akar bereisha. So just like you walk with your right foot first, what side do you put on the mezuzah? On the right side. Now we know that this has to be further elaborated because right side facing in which direction? That we're not talking about over here, and all of the nuances and the detailed dinim that people have to learn to properly put up mezuzahs. But the beginning of the right, Beisecha doesn't only mean your house. Beisecha means derech biyascha. It's good to remember this. Tanya, another price. Let's see how far we can get. That Beis HaKnesses, or Beis HaShutfim, or Beis HaIsha, right, are metamen bin hagoyim. So we have tzoras of the oir with the ayin, you have tzoras habeged, and you have tzoras habayis. It's the same rules. Whatever is considered the bayis b'negeya mezuzah is considered the bayis b'negeya the dinam of tzoras. We won't be learning any details about how big does it have to be, what color does it have to be. We're just learning about whatever the tzoras are, what is a bayis. Good. So here again, pshita, why would you think that a Beis HaShutfim and a Beis HaIsha is not a bias? Mao de Teima, when it says in Parshas Mitzayra, Asher, or in Parshas Tazria, Asher loy habayis, and the one whom the house is his. Loy, my friends, loy is singular and loy is masculine. So you might have thought, loy v'loy lo. You might have thought loy v'loy lohem. So that's why the Braisa has to say no, that it's considered a bias. I take the ema achinami. So Amar Kra, since it says bebeis eretz achuzaschem, in the house of the land of your inheritance, and this is a very unqualified term, bebeis eretz, bebayis eretz. Here it's not masculine, it's not singular, bebeis eretz. So this bebeis eretz is very broad, and it includes in it all types of homes. Asher loy habayis is lashon yachid. Asher loy habayis is lashon zachar. Ela loy lamali. So the answer is misha meyachid beisay loy. This is as a musar over here. That if you have a person, asher loy habayis means that if a person is selfish and my house is only mine. We're not focusing, interestingly, on achnasas archim, but we're focusing whether people lend things from their house to others. And people that don't lend anything, most times they are ashamed of their own stinginess, and they lie. They say, you want to borrow something? I don't have it. One of the things that has to happen when a house becomes afflicted with tzoras is before the kohen declares the house tamei, since once that declaration is made, everything in the house becomes tamei. You want to prevent that from happening, so what do? You have to take all your stuff out there. So that's the asher loy, that God afflicts tzoras on people that keep everything for themselves. And how does he get away with it? He's not even honest. He's saying, there's a chayim, guys, I'm selfish, I'm stingy, I don't want you to bang up my car, I'm not lending it. The guy says, I don't have it, I would give it. I'm a generous guy. So that guy has tzoras. So what does God do? HaKadosh Baruch Hu, mefarsim, God exposes him that his house gets tzoras. And therefore, one step, like we mentioned, before the house is declared tamei, we got to move quicker. Kishmafanas beisoi is Kishmafanas beisoi is parat lemashil kelov la'achedim. Kishmafanas beisoi. That person is afflicted. So Asher Loy is saying that if a person doesn't have that midah prat, if a person is mashal kelav lachedim, that person won't have tzoras habayis. Weiter. Beis HaKnesses, fragt die Gemara, mi metamem ben hagoyim, aiva hatanya yochel yobatik mesiyos, ubatim midrashos, metamem ben hagoyim. So here the Brisa says, Talmud leimer ubasher loy. Now loy habayis means a house that belongs to one individual, it belongs to someone. Now, that's not excluding shutfim, but it's including, that's what you mentioned, Shlomo, in the Amud Aleph. It includes a Beis HaKnesses. It's like mamish public. Partners, at least I know, it's me and you, or it's 10 people, it's us. There's a certain point where it's anyone. Habayis mishum yuchad loy yatsu elu a Beis HaKnesses, a Beis HaMedrash she'enim yuchadim loy. They don't belong to anyone in particular. Now that's a problem. So we have Astir and Braises. So answers the Gemara. Approach number one is Taka, it's a Machlekes Tanoi, Loi Kasha. The first Braisa is Rabbi Meir, and the second Braisa is Rabbanan. As we learned the Tanya, Beis HaKnesses, Sheyesh Ba Beis Dira. This is important again, that a Beis HaKnesses is only Chayiv and a Mezuzah if in there somewhere there is a Beis Dira Lachaz and HaKnesses. Then it's Chayiv and Mezuzah. But V'she'en La Beis Dira, that means it's only a Beis HaKnesses. So then, here we have clear. Machloikas Tanoim. Rameir says, still you're Chayiv. So that's the answer. So here, that will be the first Brais, will be Rabbi Meir. Even though it's not Meyuchad Lo, it's a Beis HaKnesses. This is not focusing on the fact that it's a Kodesh. Who does it belong to? And the Chachamim are Poitrim. Now, but guys, the Machloikas here is by Mezuzah. It doesn't matter. It's the same rules. It's going to go together. If it's Chayiv and Mezuzah, because it's called a bias, then if the Simanim of Tzaras are there, it's going to be a bias Mitzvah. Same thing with the Chacham. That I can tell you that these two Braises all follow the Rabbanan. The Rabbanan patted this house from a mezuzah. Fine, say that we're like kasha. The first Braisa that says that it can become a tzoras, a house that's afflicted with tzoras, is because it's taka beis haknesses, but since it has in it a beis dira, same thing. And the Chachamim say it's chayv mezuzah. Say there, so it can also become afflicted with tzoras. And the second Braisa that says it's exempt is the lesba beis dira. Let's chop another one. V'iboy yisema hava the lesba beis dira. No shamish lives there. Still, and everything goes according to the Rabbanan. But what's Asher Loi Habayis? That was the Nukud. The Asher Loi Habayis means it doesn't belong to anyone in particular. This Tana is not saying that a Beis HaShutfim is pater. A Beis HaShutfim is chayiv. We already addressed that. Even though the Torah uses the Lashon Yachid, that's for something else. That you need to live. But two people, you know who they are. Three people, you know where they are. It's interesting. There comes a certain point where it belongs to everyone. What's that point? Here are the words, and we'll continue on the next year more about it. Ha, here we're going out of the order. Ha, my friends, is the second Braisa. When are you chayiv? When are you pater? When are you pater, the second Braisa? When it's from a krach. A krach means it's a big city. A krach means a big city. Look inside the top Rashi. The krachim. Shehu makim shuvakim. The point is, it's in a city that it's not only, the dormitory city. Who is there? The people that live there. That's not called a krach. It's not about how many houses are there. A krach means that aside of there being residents there are certain activities that attract people from outside. So you have shvakim, and therefore umiskapsim sham mimekoymes harbe. And therefore ulanashi vihi asuya lakoil habali yispalo. That's pshat ve'ein lo ba'al miyuchadim. There isn't any specific owner. That house is exempted. Sai from mezuzah, and now let's focus. That house is not called a house that can become a tzoras house, because it says be'uva asher loi habayis. It's not asher loi. However, the first Braisa is the kfarim, a shul in a village. Again, it's not about how many people live there. It's about there's no shvakim. So it was built by the locals. And not that if a yid comes from abroad, they won't allow him in the shul. But the fact is, it was built by the locals and it services only the locals. So they feel they have ownership. That house is considered a proper house. A lot more, God willing, to be continued. Gavaldik Chevra.